July 2, 1943. Castelvetrano Airfield, Sicily. The Focke-Wulf 190's pilot, secure in his aerial superiority, never saw the P-40 Warhawk diving from above, until a hail of machine gun fire tore through his fuselage. In a horrifying instant, his aircraft, a symbol of German engineering, was spiraling toward the Sicilian countryside below. On the other end of that burst was First Lieutenant Charles B. Hall, a 22-year-old from Brazil, Indiana. He had just recorded what German Luftwaffe commanders, and indeed many American commanders, believed was a physical impossibility. A black pilot had engaged and destroyed one of their elite fighter aircraft. The swastika painted on Hall's P-40 Warhawk that afternoon would be the first. It would be followed by 111 more enemy aircraft, all destroyed by the men the Germans would reportedly come to call Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the Black Birdmen. In Nazi Germany, racial doctrine was state policy. It classified black people as Untermensch, subhuman, incapable of mastering complex machinery, incapable of demonstrating courage in combat. The Nuremberg laws had made this ideology concrete, forbidding marriages between Germans and people of African descent. Yet here, high above the Mediterranean, that entire worldview was about to collide catastrophically with reality. 992 trained pilots from Tuskegee, Alabama, were about to systematically demolish both German aircraft and the foundational German assumptions about racial superiority. What the Luftwaffe pilots didn't know, as they climbed to intercept American bombers in 1943, was that they were about to face some of the most rigorously trained, highly motivated, and disciplined fighter pilots in the entire United States Army Air Forces. These were men who had overcome obstacles their white counterparts never even knew existed, men who had trained harder and longer than standard pilots, and men who carried into battle not just the weight of national duty, but the crushing burden of proving an entire race's capability. The mathematics of aerial combat would soon be written in fire across the skies of Europe. 15,000 combat sorties, 1,578 missions, 112 aerial victories, and a bomber escort loss rate so low it would become the stuff of legend. These were statistics that would force even the most fanatical Nazi ideologues to confront the absolute bankruptcy of their racial theories, the wall of prejudice. The journey toward that first aerial victory began not in combat, but in the deeply hostile environment of American segregation. In 1925, the U.S. Army War College had published an official report, Employment of Negro Manpower in War, which concluded, compared to the white man, he is admittedly of inferior mentality. He is inherently weak in character. This wasn't fringe opinion, this was official military doctrine. It claimed black soldiers lacked the intelligence for technical roles and the courage for combat leadership. Yet, even as military leaders clung to these prejudices, a small group of black Americans was already proving them wrong, defying gravity and prejudice alike. Eugene Bullard had flown for France in World War I because America wouldn't let him serve. Bessie Coleman had to go to France in 1921 to earn her pilot's license when no American flight school would accept her. By the 1930s, the Coffey School of Aeronautics in Chicago had trained dozens of black civilian pilots, proving that skill knew no racial boundaries. The pressure for change intensified as war clouds gathered over Europe. Civil rights leaders like Walter White of the NAACP, labor leader of Philip Randolph, and Judge William H. Hastie lobbied relentlessly. Black newspapers, the Chicago Defender, the Pittsburgh Courier, the Baltimore Afro-American, hammered the Roosevelt administration with a simple, powerful question: how could America fight for democracy abroad while denying it at home? On April 3, 1939, Public Law 18 finally cracked open the door. An amendment required the civilian pilot training program to include one or more schools for the training of any Negro air pilot. It was a grudging concession, wrapped in segregation, but it was a beginning. When Franklin Roosevelt ran for an unprecedented third term in 1940, he needed black votes in key northern cities. On January 16, 1941, Secretary of War Henry L. Stimson announced the formation of the 99th Pursuit Squadron, an all-black flying unit. But the announcement came with a deeply insulting caveat that revealed the military's expectations. This would be an experiment to test whether blacks could in fact be trained as combat pilots. First combat. Captain Benjamin O. Davis Jr. knew the weight of this experiment better than anyone. He was to be its leader. The son of America's first black general, Davis had endured 4 years of silence at West Point. Not a single white cadet would speak to him, room with him, or eat with him outside of official duties. He had survived 4 years of total social isolation. Now he commanded men who carried the aspirations of 13 million black Americans. The 99th arrived at Farjouna, Tunisia, attached to the 33rd Fighter Group. Their commander, Colonel William W. Momier, made no secret of his skepticism, which bordered on contempt. He assigned them patrol missions over the Mediterranean, keeping them away from the real action. He was, in effect, setting them up to fail. The morning of June 2, 1943, marked their first combat mission, an attack on the heavily defended Italian island of Pantelleria. As their worn P-40 Warhawks climbed, German fighters appeared. The Tuskegee pilots held their formation, protecting the bombers. No aircraft were lost. The Germans had learned their first lesson: these pilots wouldn't break. But it was July 2, 1943, that changed everything. Charles Hall was flying his 8th mission, escorting B-25 Mitchell bombers over Sicily. 2 Focke-Wulf 192s, arrogant and fast, bore down on the bomber formation. Hall later testified, "I saw 2 Focke-Wulfs following the bombers. I headed for the space between the fighters and bombers and managed to turn inside the Jerrys. I fired a long burst and saw my tracers penetrate the second aircraft. He was turning to the left but suddenly fell off and headed straight into the ground. When Hall landed, the base erupted. The black ground crews, who had endured months of insults, finally had their answer." Hall's victory was the first aerial kill by a black American pilot in U.S. military history. A crack had appeared in the wall of prejudice, silencing the critics at Anzio. Despite Hall's victory, by January 1944, the experiment was on the verge of failure. Colonel Momier had filed his devastating report, claiming the 99th lacked aggressiveness and recommending their removal from combat. The report reached General Henry Hap Arnold, who prepared to shut the program down. The critics were ready to say, "I told you so." Then came Anzio. On January 27, 1944, the Luftwaffe launched a massive, desperate series of raids on the vulnerable Allied beachhead at Anzio. 15 pilots of the 99th, flying their obsolete P-42s, scrambled to intercept a superior force of Focke-Wulf 192s. What followed was not a patrol. It was a dogfight. The Tuskegee pilots tore into the German formations. When the smoke cleared, the 99th had shot down multiple enemy aircraft. Sources vary between 8 and 13 kills over 2 brutal days. Captain Charles Hall himself claimed 2 more victories, bringing his total to 3. In just 48 hours flying inferior equipment, they had destroyed more enemy aircraft than in their entire previous 7 months of combat. The performance was so stunning that the War Department was forced to launch a new study. It concluded the 99th was performing just as well, if not better, than white P-40 squadrons. The experiment was saved. The 99th had proven their case in blood. Birth of the Red Tails. In May 1944, the 332nd Fighter Group, combining the 99th, 100th, 301st and 302nd Fighter Squadrons, received orders that would transform them from outcasts to legends. They would join the 15th Air Force as bomber escorts, flying long, grueling and dangerous missions deep into the heart of Nazi Germany. Colonel Benjamin O. Davis gathered his pilots at Ramitelli Airfield in Italy. He gave them an order that would define their legacy: "We cannot afford to lose bombers. Our job is not to be aces. Our job is to bring those bombers home." This was revolutionary. Most fighter groups chased aces, pilots with 5 or more kills. Chasing aces meant leaving the bombers to hunt glory. Davis demanded the opposite: discipline over glory. Stay with the bombers no matter what. In June 1944, the 332nd was assigned its identification color, red. They didn't just paint the rudders. They painted the entire tail sections crimson. The P-51 Mustangs, with their brilliant red tails, red propeller spinners, and red nosebands, became instantly, unmistakably recognizable. The first bomber crews to receive red tail escorts didn't know their protectors were black. They only knew one thing: these fighters didn't leave. They stayed close, fending off attacks, never abandoning them to chase an easy kill. Word spread like wildfire through the bomber groups: request the red tails if you can get them. July 18, 1944, tested this newfound reputation. Colonel Davis led 66 Mustangs to escort bombers to Memmingen, Germany. The bombers were late. When they finally appeared, so did the Luftwaffe, in overwhelming force. Approximately 100 German fighters swarmed the formation. In 20 minutes of savage, swirling combat, 15 B-17 seconds were shot down. The 332nd lost 3 pilots. Critics pointed to the losses. But operational analysis revealed the truth: the red tails had flown into an impossible situation, outnumbered nearly 2 to 1, and had prevented a total massacre. The jet killers. By March 1945, the Luftwaffe was a shadow of its former self, but it had one last, terrifying card to play: the Messerschmitt Me-262, the world's first operational jet fighter. This was a wonder weapon. With a top speed of 540 miles per hour, it was 100 miles per hour faster than the Mustang. It was a ghost, appearing, striking, and vanishing before Allied pilots could even react. On March 24, 1945, the 332nd was assigned its most challenging mission yet: escorting bombers on a 1,600-mile round trip to Berlin, to the Daimler-Benz tank factory. Intelligence warned that the Me-262 of Jagdgeschwader 7 would be defending their capital. Colonel Davis led 43 P-51 Mustangs into the heart of the dying Reich. As they approached Berlin, the jets appeared, the largest formation of Me-260, 2 seconds ever assembled for one interception. But the red tails had studied their enemy. Lieutenant Roscoe Brown knew the jets' weaknesses. "We knew the German jets were faster," he explained. "Instead of going directly after them, we went away from them and then turned into their blind spots." Brown maneuvered perfectly, got on a jet's tail, and fired. I pulled up at him and fired 3 long bursts. Almost immediately the pilot bailed out. That same day, Lieutenant Earl Lane shot down another Me-262 with an incredible 2,000-yard deflection shot. Lieutenant Charles Brantley claimed the third. The destruction of 3 Me-262 in a single day was unprecedented. It was more jets than most fighter groups would destroy in the entire war. The Red Tails had just done the impossible again. The 332nd Fighter Group earned a Distinguished Unit Citation for this mission. Prisoners of war. Not all encounters ended in victory. 32 pilots were shot down and became prisoners of war. Their experiences revealed the deepest, most bitter irony of the war. Lieutenant Alexander Jefferson was shot down on August 12, 1944. At his interrogation, he was stunned. The German officer had a detailed file on the 332nd. The interrogator had information about Ramitelli Airfield, about our squadron commanders, even details about my parents' home in Detroit, Jefferson recalled. Their intelligence was frighteningly thorough. Inside the infamous Stalag Luft 3, Jefferson found himself in a surreal new world. He was treated like any other American officer. White bomber pilots, who in America might not have spoken to him, came up to thank him for red tail protection. The irony was not lost on Jefferson. Here I was, in a Nazi POW camp, being treated more equally by white Americans than I would be back home. When the war ended and Jefferson returned to the United States, a hero, he was immediately segregated from white officers at the disembarkation point, the Red Tail Angels. While German pilots grudgingly acknowledged the Schwarze Vogelmenschen, the American bomber crews became their most vocal champions. For men facing death on every mission, survival was the only thing that mattered, not skin color. They called them the Red Tail Angels. And the statistics proved why. Research by Air Force historian Dr. Daniel Hallman is definitive. Bombers under 332nd. Escort lost only 27 aircraft to enemy fighters total. The average for other P-51 groups of the 15th Air Force was 46. They were, quite simply, the best in the business. The final tally, a record of excellence. By war's end, the Tuskegee Airmen had compiled a combat record that permanently demolished every pre-war prejudice. Combat operations: 1,578 combat missions flown, 15,000+ individual sorties completed, 179 bomber escort missions, a testament to their reliability. Enemy aircraft destroyed, 112 enemy aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 150 enemy aircraft destroyed on the ground, 3 Mi-262 jet fighters shot down in one day, ground targets destroyed, 950 rail cars, trucks and motor vehicles, 254 locomotive engines, 1 German destroyer, crippled beyond repair, the unbeatable protection record, 27 bombers lost to enemy fighters versus 46 average for other groups. Decorations earned: 96% distinguished flying crosses, 744 air medals, 14 bronze stars, 8 purple hearts, 4 distinguished unit citations. The human cost: 66 pilots killed in action, 32 pilots captured as prisoners of war, 84 killed in training and non-combat missions. These were not just numbers. They were an irrefutable, statistical rebuttal to a century of systemic racism. The tools of victory, training and technology. This success wasn't just courage, it was superior skill and technology. At Tuskegee, the training was brutal. Pilots flew 300 hours compared to 200 for many white pilots. The washout rate was a staggering 60% compared to 40% for white cadets. Colonel Noel Parrish, Tuskegee's commander, had created a super-selected group. Only the absolute best survived. They began with hand-me-down P-40 Warhawks. But the arrival of the P-51 Mustang in July 1944 gave them the perfect weapon. The P-51D Mustang was American industrial perfection. Its Packard-built Merlin engine gave it a top speed of 437 miles per hour. Its bubble canopy gave its pilot unmatched visibility, and its 1,600-mile range meant it could fly to Berlin and back. The unsung heroes, ground crews. Behind every red-tail angel in the sky were the heroes on the ground. Of the approximately 16,000 Tuskegee Airmen who served, fewer than 1,000 are pilots. The rest were the mechanics, armorers and crew chiefs who worked miracles. They changed engines in frozen mud. They reloaded ammo belts in total blackout. Ramitelli Airfield was primitive, and the 332nd was often last in line for spare parts. Yet their aircraft availability rate, the percentage of planes ready for combat, consistently equaled or exceeded that of better supplied white units. Victory on 2 fronts. The Tuskegee Airmen fought 2 wars at once, one against fascism abroad and one against racism at home. Their combat record directly challenged both Nazi racial ideology and American segregation. Back home, their victories made headlines in black newspapers, which championed the Double 5 campaign, victory against fascism abroad and victory against racism at home. The contrast with German awareness was stark. By 1945, the Luftwaffe knew exactly who flew the red-tailed Mustangs. Meanwhile, many white Americans, thanks to a minimization of their success by the mainstream press, didn't even know black pilots existed. A legacy denied, a victory earned. Victory in Europe brought not celebration but uncertainty. The Army Air Forces, incredibly, planned to maintain segregation despite the combat evidence of its absurdity. For decades, the achievements of the Tuskegee Airmen were largely erased or forgotten by mainstream America. Lee Archer, an ace with 4 victories, worked as an executive. He rarely spoke of his war record. "Nobody believed me anyway," he said. "A black fighter pilot? Must be lying." But the truth could not be buried forever. In 1948, President Harry Truman signed Executive Order 9981, integrating the U.S. military. The Tuskegee Airmen's undeniable combat performance was a primary catalyst for this historic change. Benjamin O. Davis, Jr., the man who had endured the silence at West Point and led the Red Tails over Berlin, became the Air Force's first black general in 1954. In 2007, President George W. Bush awarded the Congressional Gold Medal to the Tuskegee Airmen. Only 300 of the original pilots survived to attend. Many had waited over 60 years for their nation's highest recognition. The Schwarze Vogelmenschen had proven that prejudice crumbles when confronted with undeniable capability. Every German fighter destroyed, every bomber brought home, every mission completed, added evidence to an irrefutable case. The color of a pilot's skin has nothing to do with his ability to fly and fight. Roscoe Brown, the man who shot down a German jet over Berlin, summarized their achievement perfectly. We didn't just fight the Germans, we fought ignorance, prejudice, and hatred. And we won all 3 battles. The Tuskegee Airmen hadn't just won battles, they had changed history. They fought 3 wars simultaneously and won them all, defeating the Luftwaffe, challenging Nazi ideology, and helping demolish American segregation through their undeniable, soaring excellence.